Most jazz beginners hit a wall with arpeggios and end up playing solos that sound like exercises. I kept running into this too, but once I discovered this simple method, it became easy to turn arpeggios into solos that flow like real jazz. And it hasn't just worked for me, it's helped thousands of my students play solos that sound like jazz as well. So in this video, I'm gonna take you through this simple method so that you can use arpeggios to make your solos sound like music, not just running exercises. When you're starting out, there's a right way and a wrong way to practice arpeggios, and most beginners waste time running through every possible arpeggio position and inversion, things they never actually use in real solos. But in jazz, the magic happens with simple one-octave arpeggios, as you can see in this example. So the most efficient way to practice them is in the scale, not all over the neck. Let me show you what I mean. I learned this exercise from Barry Harris, and this isn't just theory and technique. Playing your arpeggios this way means that they're always right there when you need them for solos, and that's the foundation for making music, not just exercises. But before we add phrasing and rhythm, let's keep it simple. Try improvising just with the arpeggio for now. That alone will teach you some of the most important skills for playing jazz. Let me show you. Getting comfortable with soloing over chord changes is an essential skill. Let's start with the basics, so a 2-5-1 in C major. D minor 7 to G7 to C major 7. Take a listen to how these chords flow together. Let's break it down. You need the arpeggios for each chord to solo over the progression, and luckily you already practiced them in the exercise. Now over D minor 7, you can use the arpeggio starting on the second note of the scale. For the G7, jump up to the fifth note and play that arpeggio. And for the root, you have this one, the C major 7. The first thing to do is practice soloing with this. Just come up with some lines, use rhythm and make up some melodies, maybe compose or play out of time, and notice how I'm really careful in getting from one chord to the next. After a while, you'll start to hear stronger melodies and more interesting rhythms in your playing, like this. This approach is perfect for nailing the changes, making every chord stand out in your solo. And once you're comfortable with this, you can start adding a few notes around the arpeggios. That's where things really get fun. Okay, you know your arpeggios, so now let's add the first trick that makes your solos sound more interesting. Let's start with the C major 7 arpeggio. Now here's the trick. You can sneak in the notes from the C major scale that surround the arpeggio notes. For example, instead of jumping straight from arpeggio note to arpeggio note, add a scale note in between, and suddenly your line sounds like this. Or if you play it in the other direction and descend, you get something like this. It is really that simple. Just spot the notes around your arpeggio and use them as stepping stones to connect the main notes. Super easy, barely an inconvenience. Next up, let's add some spicy notes to give your lines even more bebop flavor. You can level up the lines and add some real jazz character by adding chromatic passing notes. You already have the notes from the scale, the diatonic notes, but jazz loves those sneaky notes that sit outside the scale. And here's the fun part of this. You can do a lot with chromatic passing notes. There are all sorts of systems for using them, but for now, just keep it simple. Make sure you resolve those chromatic notes to a chord tone. That's what I'm doing in this example. Just by mixing chromatic and diatonic notes with your arpeggio, you can get something like this. When you practice this, try composing your own lines and notice what sounds good to you. Now, one classic jazz move is to put the highest note of your phrase on an offbeat. For example, in the last line, you heard the B land on the one and if you give that an accent, then that's classic jazz phrasing. There is a way to make it easier to do that in your jazz lines, and that's the next level. But keep in mind that you can actually go through this video and just pick one of the topics to explore, write some lines, and work on getting that into your playing. It doesn't have to be in this order. So far, we've been adding passing notes here and there, but you can also add short melodies that move to a chord tone from above and below. Those are called enclosures, and they are great for changing things up because the melody moves around more. Here's how that works with our C major 7 arpeggio. If you're aiming for a note, let's just take the G. You could play a note from the scale above, so the A, and a chromatic note below, the F sharp. And of course, finally, land on your target, the G. Let's see this in action. Here I'm adding enclosures around each note in the C major 7 arpeggio. Remember that you're still seeing the C major 7 arpeggio in the scale as well, and those notes can also be used. So now you can create something like this and compare this to the first examples to see how far this is from just playing the arpeggio. It's actually pretty simple. Just pick a chord tone, surround it with a note above and below, and then land right back on it. Here's another example with enclosures around the root and the fifth. Okay, let's add some rhythm to the arpeggio itself with this very common bebop trick. If you want to sound like a bebop pro in seconds, here's a trick that never fails: the Mighty Triplet. The moment you hear it, you'll recognize that classic jazz sound. Now what's happening here? So I'm playing the arpeggio as an 8th note triplet, which changes the pace and adds some energy. Now to give it even more bebop flavor, I'm also adding a chromatic leading note to take us to the first note of the arpeggio. And check out what you can do if you mix this with a few enclosures as well. And you also want to know this lick, which is a favorite of George Benson, and I'm pretty sure he stole it from Charlie Parker. You can pick any arpeggio and instead of playing it straight, play it as a triplet, plus sneak in a leading note before the first note. It really is a recipe for instant bebop. Now earlier I mentioned that arpeggio inversions aren't that useful for jazz lines. So what should you do instead? Let me show you a much more powerful concept. If you want your lines to sound less predictable, more interesting, here's a technique that's way more useful than the usual arpeggio inversions, especially in jazz. Now, if you analyze jazz solos, you'll find that arpeggio inversions aren't that common in jazz lines, and that's because when you listen to bebop and later jazz, you'll hardly ever hear them used that way. Now, triads, that's a different story. Those get flipped around all the time, but they're maybe also a bit stronger as melodies. So what do jazz players do instead? Now they use something called the pivot arpeggio, moving a part of your melody up an octave, adding a surprising turn that still sounds incredibly melodic. This is the basic C major 7. Now if I take the root and move that up an octave, and then play the notes in the same order, then I actually get this beautiful melodic skip in there. Now if you throw in a couple of chromatic notes, so just those notes next to all the scale notes, you get this great sound. And you can also throw in an enclosure to get something like this. Now changing the melody and rhythm is great, but you can also tweak the way that you actually play the notes, your phrasing. Let's look at how to make your playing even more expressive. Ever wonder why some jazz lines sound alive and flowing while others feel a bit robotic? Now the secret is in the phrasing, how you play the notes, not just which notes you play. It's a little bit like the difference between reading a sentence only using one tone and speaking with normal, real emotion. Let's start with a simple trick, sliding into a note. Here I'm sliding into the top note of the phrase. You can also add a slide later in the line to give it a different flavor. Another great phrasing tool is the trill, a quick back and forth between two notes, often played with legato technique. And you can add that to the arpeggio like this. You've just unlocked a ton of ways to make your C major 7 arpeggio sound amazing. And here's the best part. You can use this same arpeggio over a lot of other chords to create incredible jazz lines. But how do you actually make it work over different chords like minor 7s or also dominants? That's exactly what I cover in this next video. So if you want to take your jazz solos to the next level, check it out. Learn jazz, make music.